In 1934, an 8-year-old boy in Chicago handed his mother the coins he had earned selling newspapers on a cold corner before school, and she counted them into the jar that paid the rent, and neither of them thought there was anything unusual about it, because in those years, a child was not only fed by the family, a child helped to carry it. By the time this is over, you will understand what the children of the Depression knew that many grown adults do not know now. Number 7 on this list is the thing nearly every child could do with their hands that almost no adult can do today. Number 4 is the reason a child of the Depression could make a whole afternoon of fun out of an empty can and a piece of string. And number 2 is the heavy thing these children carried that no child should have to carry at all. These were the years when childhood ended early, and the young learned things the rest of us have forgotten. They didn't have much, but they knew how to make it last. Number 7, they could make and mend with their own hands. A child of the Depression grew up watching every object in the house be made, fixed, or saved, and they learned it by doing. A girl could sew and darn and turn a hem before she was 10. A boy could mend a tool, patch a roof, splice a rope, and use a knife with care and skill. They knew how to plant a row, feed an animal, and bring in a harvest. These were not lessons set aside for a special class. They were simply the work of the household, learned at a parent's elbow, and a child carried that competence with their own 2 hands for the rest of their life. Most adults now cannot do half of what a careful 10-year-old could do in 1935. Number 6, they worked young and gave what they earned. Childhood in those years was not set apart from the work of survival. Children delivered newspapers in the dark before school, ran errands for a few coins, picked crops in the season, minded younger ones so a mother could take in laundry, and did 100 small jobs for a few cents that went straight into the family's hands. The money a child earned was not their own to spend. It went into the jar with everyone else's, because the family lived or went under together, and the children knew it. A boy of 12 might think of himself, with some pride and some weight, as one of the people keeping the household alive. That was a real thing to carry at 12. Number 5, they made their own fun out of nothing. There was no money for toys, and so there were almost no bought toys, and the children of the Depression became the inventors of their own play. An empty thread spool became a top. A tin can and a length of string became stilts to clatter down the street on. A stick and an old ball, a piece of chalk on the pavement, a knife and a patch of dirt. These were the makings of whole afternoons. They played games that needed nothing but the children themselves. Games passed from older child to younger in the street and the schoolyard. A child raised this way never once was bored for want of a thing to play with, because they had learned that the fun was something you made, not something you were given. Here is what stood behind all of it. By the worst years of the early 1930s, with a quarter of the country's workers without jobs, the family was often only as secure as everyone in it, children included, could make it. A father's wages might be gone entirely, and what the mother and the children could earn and save and grow might be all that stood between the family and losing the home. Childhood did not pause for the Depression. It bent around it. The young were pulled into the work of survival because survival needed every hand, and that simple, hard fact shaped a whole generation before it was grown. It gave them strengths that lasted a lifetime. It also took something from them, and we should be honest about both. Now answer this before you hear the rest. Think of a child you know who is 8 or 10 or 12 years old. Could that child do what these children did? Work a job, mind the little ones, make their own toys, and hand over every penny to the family without being asked? Write yes or no in the comments right now, before you hear the rest, and be honest. Then keep watching, because what these children carried was not all strength, and the last of it is heavier than the rest. Number 4. They understood the value of a single coin. A child of the Depression knew the worth of money in a way that comfortable times do not teach. They knew what a nickel could buy and what it could not, because they had earned nickels in the cold and watched their parents stretch them. They knew that a thing once bought could not be easily replaced, so they were careful with what little they had. A pair of shoes was guarded, a coin was thought over before it was spent, and the casual waste that surrounds children now would have been unthinkable to them. That early hard lesson in the value of money stayed with the children of the Depression their whole lives long, and many of them never could bring themselves to waste anything, even when decades later they had plenty. Let me tell you about one of those children. A girl of 11 in a small town in 1933 came home from school each day to a list of work, not play. She minded her 3 younger brothers and sisters, while her mother took in sewing. She helped put up the garden's vegetables in the late summer heat. She walked the youngest to and from school, and on Saturdays, she cleaned houses for a neighbor for a few coins she brought straight home. She was, in every way that mattered, half a grown woman already, and she was 11. Years later, she did not speak of it with bitterness, but she did not pretend it was a happy, carefree childhood either. It was not. She had been needed too early and too much, and she carried both the strength and the loss of that for the rest of her life. Number 3, they learned to do without and not to complain. Perhaps the hardest thing these children learned was how to want something and not get it, and to bear that quietly. There were no birthday piles of gifts, often no gifts at all. There was the answer no, said gently or said sharply, far more often than the answer yes, and a child learned not to ask for what the family plainly could not give. They learned to be grateful for an orange at Christmas, for a meal that filled them, for shoes that fit. That capacity to do without and not make a grief of it was a real strength, and it served them all their lives. It was also, let us be honest, a strength carved out of going without the small joys that children deserve. Number 2, they carried fear that was not theirs to carry. This is the part the fond memories leave out. The children of the Depression were not shielded from the family's troubles because the troubles were too large to hide. A child knew when the rent was short. A child saw a parent's face when the work ran out, felt the quiet at the table when the money would not stretch, understood far too young that the home itself might be lost. They lay awake with worries that belonged to grown adults, and they learned to keep those fears to themselves so as not to add to a parent's burden. That is a heavy thing to set on the shoulders of a child of 9 or 10, and many of them carried the mark of it, that watchfulness, that bracing for hard news, for the whole of their lives. Number 1, they grew up too soon, and it stayed with them. When all of it is added together, the work and the want and the worry, what it amounts to is a childhood cut short. The children of the Depression were handed responsibility, hardship, and fear years before children should have to bear them, and they rose to it, and in rising to it, they lost some of the years that are meant to be simply for being a child. That is the truth of it, both halves at once. They became capable, careful, resilient people who could do almost anything and waste almost nothing. And they paid for those strengths with a piece of their childhood, and most of them knew it, and would have spared their own children every bit of it if they could. That is the wisdom they leave us, and it is not a simple one. So, what did you answer at the start? Now you know the whole weight of what these children carried. They could make and mend with their hands, work a job, and hand over every cent, build a whole afternoon of joy out of a can and a string. They knew the worth of a coin, how to do without, and how to carry fears far too big for them. None of it was a carefree childhood, and not one of them would have called those years a golden time to be young. They were children who grew up too soon, in the hardest years their country ever faced, and they became remarkable people, partly because of it, and partly in spite of it. They were the hard years. They didn't have much, but they knew how to make it last. And that's worth remembering. If your parents or grandparents were children in the Depression, tell me in the comments the one thing those years taught them that they never let go of. I want to know what your family carried out of those years. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week we go back inside the hardest years America ever faced and the forgotten skills the people who survived them knew.